I'm really just feel privileged to be here with you, and this is often very empowering to me on my journey as mayor, to sometimes pull back a little bit and share some spirit and some energy with folks. So I'm looking forward to sharing some remarks with you, but I'm really looking forward to, at the end, just doing a question and answering session where maybe we can share some ideas and come together in spirit as well. I've been very fortunate now to be mayor of the City of Newark for 3 years. And in this time, I have not had a week that's gone by without somebody sort of stopping me in my tracks and making me in awe of sort of the power of humanity. These are individual people who never let their inability to do everything undermine their determination to do something. I get reminded every day why I'm doing what I'm doing, but more importantly, I get inspired and challenged, if not, to try to keep up with the community that I serve. The reality goes from people like a man we're going to try to recognize in the next week or so, who every single day gets up from where he lives, crosses a street in Newark, and has bought a lawnmower. He's retired now, bought his own lawnmower and mows the median by a park, and then sweeps up the entire street. And one of my staffers found it odd, stopped him and found out that he wasn't an employee of the city or the county. He just felt that this was his street and his community, and he wanted to keep it clean. You see these stories in our city that just remind me what my mom used to always tell me about our democracy, is that this nation was founded in these perfect ideals, but in a savagely imperfect reality. And therefore the story of America is a story not of sort of the great male thesis of a history where great men descended upon the earth and guided us towards our ideals and principles, but more often, or actually what is the case, is the fact that our history is a history of ordinary people who are willing to do extraordinary things to make real on the promise of our democracy. This was how I was brought up by two parents who, in many ways, are my heroes. They are ordinary Americans, but they raised my brother and I to try to understand these simple truths about our country. They wanted my brother and I to understand that we drink deeply from wells of freedom that we did not dig, that we lavishly from tables prepared for us by our ancestors, and eat the fruit from trees that we did not plant or cultivate, that we owe an obligation to the past, and that we, as my brother and I were often told, will never be called to the levels of courage of our ancestors. We'll never be called to storm beaches in Normandy or Midway, or to get on buses and do freedom rides, or go out even and register people to vote, knowing that that act alone could have us ending up in a swamp someplace with our lives taken from us. What my parents asked of my brother and I was to try to live a life where we give our best measure of love towards a larger community evolution, and that try to make real on the words that echo within our nation every single day. When I visit schools, and I sat with principals from Newark schools yesterday, and hear the kids in Newark say the same thing that kids in Los Angeles say, or Detroit say, the same things that children in Florida say, or in Iowa say. They stand up and say these words that unfortunately are aspirational. They say that we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And so I feel very privileged that I am living a life that I get to be in a job where every day I get to interact with folks that have this kind of understanding, have this kind of drive. And if anything, the story of my experience in Newark has been residents themselves challenging me to expand my vision of Newark, of myself, of our nation, and then do what's necessary to make that vision real. As one person said, having great vision is good, but it's not enough just to stare up the steps. You've got to have the courage to step up the stairs. And so this is the story that I've lived now and had the privilege of living ever since I was a law student. And the story isn't really glamorous in how I started. I always joke that I found out the truth of what my parents always said in Newark. And so I had a father that was mercilessly would tease me as I went to school after school after school. He's like, boy, you got more degrees in the month of July. When are you going to get a real job? You know, you got more degrees in the thermometer, and I don't even know if you could tell the temperature. And but they would always say to me, my family, when I would graduate from a university or a school, they'd always say, boy, never forget you can learn more from a woman on the 5th floor of the projects or from the community than you can from one of these fancy professors. And so here I was, still a law student, and I had this audacious, bold dream that I would jump into a challenging environment and become a part of a struggle and make a difference. And I had a youthful arrogance with me, and I decided that I was going to take up Chris Rock's challenge. And Chris Rock says, why is it the most violent street in every city? It's named after the man that stood for nonviolence. And I moved on to Martin Luther King Boulevard in Newark, New Jersey. And I'll never forget my first week there. I was sort of hit by the challenges in that neighborhood that I visibly saw. And I was commuting back and forth to Yale Law School. And when I started getting frustrated with some of the things happening and told people that I really wanted to get involved, finally somebody said, hey, look, you need to meet with the tenant president of the large high-rises across the street from where you've moved. She is the anchor in that community. And you'll know, it's amazing to me that as I got into that building, found out where she lived, I get up to her door, and I suddenly realize, wait a minute, this is apartment 5A, the 5th floor of these buildings. And I knock on this door, and I hear like a linebacker-sounding voice, who is it? And I said, Cory Booker, and the door flat open and said, who are you? And again, I had my youthful arrogance, so I said, well, ma'am, I'm Cory Booker, I'm from Yale Law School, and I'm here to help you. And she looks at me and she says, what? I said, well, I'm here to help. And she goes, you want to help me? And I said, yeah. And she goes, okay. And she slams the door. She pushes past me. She starts marching to the stairwell, down 5 flights of stairs, into the lobby, through the courtyard, into the middle of Martin Luther King Boulevard. And I'm standing there with her. And she wheels around, and this woman looks at me, and she says, you want to help me? Tell me what you see around you. I'm like, what? She goes, describe what you see. And I said, okay. Well, I see graffiti. I see an abandoned building that they're using for drugs. And I just started describing the neighborhood. And she just starts shaking her head as she's listening to me. And then suddenly, when I finish, she goes, you can never help me. She turns around, she starts walking away, looking even more frustrated. So I run after her, and I stop her. I said, what are you talking about? And she wheels around, and she looks at me, and she goes, boy, you need to understand something. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees problems and darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those people who sees hope and opportunity and love or the face of God, then you can be someone who helps me. And she marched off, leaving me there standing in the street. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, grasshopper, thus endeth the lesson. So I began just going to her apartment, coming correct, as they say. And I used to just sit there, and I would watch these mostly women, mostly African-American women, who would sit there and share meals and stories. And I started noticing that if somebody was in trouble in the building, they'd figure out a way to come together and solve that problem. And that every excuse they could find to do a holiday event in the basement of these buildings, creating out of a dank basement, which most of us would have seen it as that, a sanctuary, beautiful. If it was Thanksgiving, if it was St. Patrick's Day, they'd have, gosh, it wasn't even an Irish person within miles from there, and they had St. Patrick's Day celebrations that could have put any good Irishman to shame. It was this amazing, amazing existence that I began to see that these women were creating, were fighting for, were justifying, were making happen. And this became the story of my beginning, of my professional life. I started representing them when I finally got out of law school, and we ended up taking on the slumlord and doing creative things. He eventually got convicted in federal court, and I ended up moving into the buildings that were eventually taken over by the Public Housing Authority, and my political career got started then as well. If you fast forward now, many years later, that start for me, that beginning, eventually yielded into becoming mayor of the largest city in the state of New Jersey. And I get very frustrated because this lesson that Miss Jones, her name is Miss Virginia Jones, the lesson Miss Virginia Jones taught me early, and that I often have to reaffirm or relearn on a regular basis, is the challenge we have in America right now. How dare we as a nation begin to resign ourselves to the problems as we see it, as opposed to having that bold and audacious view that we are a special people, that humanity itself has within itself a reservoirs of strength that we're not actualizing or realizing, that we don't demand for ourselves a nation that does not see the levels of high violence that we have right now, that the land of the free and the home of the brave should not warehouse more people in prisons than any other country on the globe, that we should not have people like I see in my city who go to bed every night afraid, fear for their lives, fear that they don't know how they're going to keep taking their prescription drugs for diabetes or some other illness because they can't afford it. people who are worried about making ends meet, keeping a roof over their head. Aren't we a bolder nation than that? I found, actually, that these disagreements that are often highlighted on the national media, when you come and talk with people, we actually have so much more in common than we have that divides us. Now, this isn't just rhetoric that you often hear in national campaigns, but we decided to make it the reality in the city of Newark. I decided as mayor of the city that the first and most important thing to do in our city is to remind people that we are a common people that have a common vision, and that the more audacious we can make the vision, the more unifying we could perhaps make the spirit of our city. We started with a bold statement, and we sat down, we had meetings on this, and we decided that our mission statement for the city of Newark was going to be that Newark, New Jersey would set the national standard for urban transformation in 3 specific areas: public safety, economic abundance, and the life of children and families. And that first one for us was the biggest, most important, because I tell you, when I became mayor, so many people would line up and tell me what we could not do. I almost began to savor it as people used to come in and say, Mayor, you can't do this and you can't do that. And probably the one that was the most important to me was one of the best criminologists in the country that people all over the globe pay to come into cities and tell you how to reduce violent crime. And he sat there talking to me and listening to my ambitious statements about the city of Newark, and he goes, well, look. You know, crime doesn't go down that fast, Mayor, and you know, you shouldn't go out too far on a limb. You're talking about murders all the time, and Newark's got a very bad murder problem, and there's some issues beyond your control here. I've seen other mayors go talk about the murder rate and pledge their careers on it and come back and burn them. You could be the best, reduce the murder rate 5 or 10% this first term, but that's real progress. And I remember him getting up and leaving, and me looking at my chief of staff at the time, and I said, we're going to prove this guy a liar. And I knew that he was right in one way. I, as mayor, could not lower the murder rate more than 5 or 10%. But what I also knew was that the power of my city was if we could pull the city together around our common ideals and our common values and get rid of the distractions, we would make a tremendous change. You know, years later, I was invited down to Memphis and asked to speak to a large group, almost 800 people in the room, about the changes we were making in Newark and what were some of the things we were able to get done. And the first thing I did, I said, let's do an experiment. I want everybody in this room to close your eyes, and at the count of 3, I want you to point north. Now, be slow about it, because you don't want to smack the person in the face next to you. And after they did it, I said, open your eyes, and they started chuckling all throughout the room, because for every person that was there was a different direction that was being pointed. And I said, aha! I said, that's what was going on in Newark when we came in, that there's so many people of good intention and so many people doing really great things in their silos, but we weren't all pulling in the same direction. And so for Newark, when we said we were going to reduce crime and violence, we decided to start saying that we're going to do it in a much more cohesive, collective, unifying way. Now, we had to start off doing what I think everybody needs to do. If you're going to come to a game, if you're going to come to a team, you've got to bring your A game. You've got to be a big part of that team. And so many of us show up every day just giving enough that we need to give. My father used to always joke, he said, so you're working hard enough just to be fired, and just not to be fired, and you're not contributing what you should contribute. You show up every single day, you got to give more of yourself. You've got to make sure that you are living up to your calling. You were born, I would hear this all the time, to magnify the glory of the universe, not just to get by. And so we said that we in the city of Newark need to start that and have more integrity with the way we do policing in our city. And so I did a real close look at what was going on in Newark, and I started scratching my head because things just didn't make sense. The first day I got elected, I go into police precincts, and they look like scenes from a show I used to watch with my dad called Barney Miller. Guys were working on typewriters that belonged in the Smithsonian Museum. I'm not joking. Here we are in the age of technology, and guys were working on typewriters. And the funny thing about it was that they were so protective of these typewriter ribbons. And because if they left and they came back with an arrest and had to type up a report, somebody else would have taken that ribbon to another place. So the guys started carrying their typewriter ribbons around with them. So the uniform in Newark was a gun, a badge, bullets on the belt, and a typewriter ribbon. So we're like, this is insane. And you dig a little deeper in the police department, and you find out that there's 3 shifts during a 24-hour period. There's 1 daytime shift and 2 nighttime shifts. And we found out that the overwhelming majority of our police officers, close between 60 and 70%, were working in the daytime shift. When was most violent crime that we wanted to fight happening? It was happening at night. We dug a little deeper and saw things that were just weird. Like we had detectives in our gang task force working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Now, I know I just meant the head of your business organization here. You guys in this city might have gangs that work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. But in Newark, that was just not the way things went. So we knew we had to have integrity with what we were bringing to the game. And we decided that we had to not just be getting by, not just doing enough. We had to show a level of intensity and a level of sacrifice that we were willing to get the job done. And the great thing about teams and police officers that were on it is that so many of the guys wanted to be a part of something as special like that. The men and women of our police department were ready to be heroes, and many of them were doing heroic things. When I walked in that first police precinct, I went in the back and saw a guy fixing motorcycles, and one of the other officers who was with me would say, "Hey, Cory, that guy buys tools out of his own pocket because the city can't afford them or doesn't put it in the line items, and he fixes the motorcycles himself." I saw one of our specialized task forces, they went in their own pocket and bought computers for themselves. So there are so many people ready to answer a call. And that's another thing I've learned is that if you give people the opportunity, if you give people the challenge, like a president standing before a nation, saying up, and that is not going to be a dream. That moon is going to be a destination. That to have what one author calls a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal for a community, it's rallying. And that's what we gave to the police department. I didn't stop there. I started going out with my security detail. One of the guys who's a great guy here is Jose Negron, who's here with me tonight. And I started saying to them, "Guys, you work a full job, you have families, I know that, but you know what? I want you volunteering with me at night as well." And the guy said, "Oh, okay." And we started going out from like 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning, rolling around the city. And I enjoyed it because we would pull police cars over. And for a guy that used to get pulled over a lot when I was growing up, it was a lot of fun to pull police cars over. And I would knock on the window, driver's license, registration, please. No, I would knock on their windows and say, "Hey, guys, we're a part of something. You are the most important actor in the American democracy today. You are on the front lines of the fight for the American dream. There are so many people in this nation that have stopped believing in who we are. They've stopped believing that the night in Newark belongs to the nation, to the people, to the community. What you do tonight could begin to wake up the moral imagination of this neighborhood, of this city, of the state, of the country. Take action." We started running around ourselves late at night and doing things that people were shocked to see their mayor doing. It was really a lot of fun. My security detail got madder and madder at me, saying, "Mayor, stay in the car." They would roll up on street corners. In the first month of January of 2008, we actually my guys recovered 4 guns off of the streets and made lots of arrests. And again, every time they'd roll up on a street, I remember one time guys who were selling drugs, shocked to see the mayor's car rolling up. Everybody threw the drugs in the air, ran off. They said, "Stay in the car, Mayor." And they went out and ran. They made the arrests. And then they said, "Mayor, you can come out of the car." And of course I came out. "The mayor's here. What can I do?" "And Mayor, we've arrested everybody, but I'm the mayor. What can I do?" And finally, one of my details says, "Oh, Cory, Mayor, you could, I guess we got to find the drugs now. They were all thrown in the air." And I said, "Okay." So I get on my belly and I'm searching for the drugs, and the lights start going on because we're in a residential neighborhood. And I'll never forget, this woman sort of pokes her head out of the house and said, "Mayor, is that you?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "Well, what are you doing?" And I looked at her and I said, "Ma'am, I'm looking for drugs." Amazing action. Amazing action started happening. We challenged foundations to come together. It was the first time, in fact, one of the foundations remarked when we asked foundations from banks and businesses and philanthropists all to come together in a room, I was so inspired because one person sat up and just said, "Hey, this is the first time we've all actually sat together in a room." And I'm like, "Guys, you give millions of dollars to the city, but you're not talking to each other." Well, let me tell you this. We are going north. We're going to make Newark a safe city. And I know you're a healthcare foundation and you're an education foundation. Well, the biggest issue for the parents, we've polled them about their kids, is the safety of their children walking to and from schools. And you're a healthcare foundation. The leading cause of death for black men 18 to 25 in the city is murder. I said, all of you may have diverse issues, but we can all agree that this is something we should do together. We started going to the clergy patrols, and I enjoyed them. I invited all the clergy, whoever would come with me, to go into a hotel and have a day of fasting and prayer. And so many guys were like, fasting and prayer? Oh, yes! And they joined me as we prayed and we fasted. But I reminded everybody that faith without works is dead. So when we leave here, let's work together. And we had clergy patrols coming up. We even started a senior citizen police academy, because all of us understand that there was blocks and streets where that woman would always look out of her window. She knew everything that was going on, and we wanted to recruit them into the game. They loved the day that we took them to the firing range. I'm telling you, in Newark, we have some grandmas with guns that could put Sarah Palin to shame. Everybody, let's affirm human life and human dignity. Let's make a story happen in Newark that the nation will talk about. And indeed, as 2008 went on, things started happening. First 2 months of 2008, we set a record since before I was born of the longest period in our city without a murder. By the end of 2008, we had dropped the murder rate a dramatic fashion. We were the #1 city in America for dropping shootings and murders. And now here I am, mayor. We're in our 3rd year. Every day, the statistics are getting better. Last month, we cut the murder rate 50% based on 2008 numbers. And overall, we're down on shootings since I've been mayor 42% in our city. And that murder rate that guy told me I couldn't get down, 5 or 10% down, we've cut it by 1/3, and we're still making progress. Now this is what's possible. In America today, it is no longer an issue. We've come so far. Look at our history. It's no longer an issue of can we do something. It is only now an issue of do we have the will to do it? Can we bring people together? Can we focus on a problem? You know, people told me, Cory, public safety cameras are so important, but we don't have the money for them. I said, we have the money. The city might not have the money, but let's challenge people to pitch in and buy cameras and wireless technology. And now Newark has one of the cities, and it's a small-sized city, but one of the cities with the largest wireless networks for public safety in the entire United States of America. Because we focus our resources, and the cameras are creating public safety. But we looked at other things, because we knew at the end of the day, police just treat the symptom of a problem. They actually don't really treat the problem. We had to start empowering our people to succeed at every level and in every area. Nobody was going to be marginalized. Everybody was on center stage. And as we started drilling down even further into problems, we said, hey, we're either going to find somebody else in America that's doing this to learn from, take their idea, incubate it here, innovate it, make it better, or if there's nobody else in America doing it, we're going to find a way to get it done. We looked at the issue of prisons, and we realized that this was where crime was being festering and seeding, because guys would come out. And the recidivism rates were just shocking. I went to Rikers Island 2 weeks ago to look at an ex-offender reentry program, talked to some of the staff there. The last time they did a study was 3 years ago, and the kids leaving Rikers, 80% of them were coming back within a year. That's such a sin. Does that mean 80% of these children are just bad? No. We are beyond the point in America where we've got to start talking about who's to blame. We must get to the point and start asking a more important question: is who is responsible? We all are responsible. And in fact, the bad people, the loud people, I don't worry about them. I think King was so right that the problem today is not the vitriolic words and the evil actions of the bad people. It's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. We saw in Newark that kids were leaving these incarceration centers, and we were just like, done. Okay, society, government, community is done. And if that kid wanted to do the right thing, they would have to go to East Orange, out of our city, to meet with a probation officer or parole officer. They couldn't go back to the local school. That school didn't want those kids. They'd have to go down to the central bureaucracy, try to navigate and advocate for themselves to find the right school to go to. When we started looking at all the places these kids had to go, 14 years old, 13-year-old, do they have a bus car? Do they have a good advocate to walk with them or take them through this process? We said, no wonder we have recidivism rates that are off the charts for juveniles. So we went to some folks. We said, we need to pull people together. I need to get a venture philanthropist that's willing to fund a pilot program. I need to get the school system. I need to get parole. I need to get mentors and tutors. Heck, you guys are ex-offenders. We need you to come in here and tell these kids not to go that way in the first place. And we decided to create a great center. We called it the YES Center, Youth Employment Education Success Center, and it's doing incredibly well. We looked at adult offenders and found out the majority of adult offenders, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, the majority of them, the reason why they recidivate is something called technical parole violations. They don't realize that it's almost impossible to try to get a driver's license when they come out. It's so hard to get a job. You don't realize that you had a traffic ticket or that was in a different town that became a failure to appear in court, that became a warrant out for your arrest. All this administrative law nightmares. And we saw that these guys were just getting tangled up, feeling like they had no options and no hopes. Often that stuff would end up going back to jail, or because they had no hope. It's the most pernicious thing in the world to have, a cancer on your soul, no hope. They would often go back to the streets to do what was easy. So we created the nation's first ever pro bono legal service project for ex-offenders. We created something called Release, Re-Entry, R-E, Legal, L-E, Services, Release, S-E. And now last night I was talking with the lawyers, and many of them I brought together who worked on my campaign. We had over 1,000 lawyers involved in my campaign, either contributing or working. I said, guys and ladies, we need to get this started. We need to show that we can do something. And now, after 2.5 years, we've got served over 1,000 clients, and it's just exciting to see what's happening. We took this one program, we saw that, wait a minute, the kids most likely to go to prison are children of incarcerated adults. I said, wow, well, what about those kids? What's happening with them? And we started to realize, well, one of the challenges, and I hear people deplore it every day, and we thought of this program during the campaign when we heard every presidential candidate stand up around Father's Day in the presidential campaign and said, we should raise your kids and stand up. That's wonderful rhetoric to say we should all raise our kids. Parental involvement in education is the most important thing for student success. And we can all talk about how important parenting is, but what are we doing about it? So we decided to go and look at guys coming home from prison that had kids. And we realized that it presented big problems for those guys. First of all, they had child support arrears, often were high. There were complications with that. Many of them weren't paying. Many of them were afraid to even get involved with their kids' lives because they'd have to see the mother of their child and feel the shame or the pressure. Where's the money? We started seeing all the problems these guys had and said, well, let's figure out a program to empower them to succeed. Because God bless America, their failure we're all paying for. New Jersey alone, billions of dollars a year involved in just warehousing this guy, a drag on our economy. If they're successful, each one of their successes represents tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each one, their successes, and not having to be policed, not having to be incarcerated, not having to be adjudicated, and also the taxes that they'd be paying once they're adults. Also the empowerment of their children they're going to do to break this vicious cycle of cradle to crime. So we started seeing that if we've got our guys, and we put together a group of guys in our test group who came out of prison, we said, you guys want to take care of your kids? What most men are going to say, yeah, I want to take care of my kids. And well, we want to create a fraternity around your fatherhood. And we're going to call it Delta Alpha Delta Sigma. Dads. Come on, fellas. And we pulled them all together, and we got Men's Warehouse, again, partnerships. Men Warehouse to donate suits for us, and we gave them parenting classes and worked on their marketability, and we took them on groups. I took some guys out to the movies with their kids, and just did everything that we could to empower these men to succeed. We brought in other guys that were just role models. What does it mean to be a good father? Because many guys are grown up in households where they don't have a father. They don't have a role model. There's an old saying that children, this is James Baldwin, children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. What if the models that these kids have from the youngest ages are the pernicious models or an absence of a model? So we started working with these guys, proud men, strong men, men with divinity in their eyes and their hearts and their spirits. And before you knew it, now we're in our second or I think third year now of the program. It's one of the best reentry programs in the United States of America. The employment rate's to the roof. The recidivism rate is below 3%. But most importantly, the guys, if you see their graduation from this program, this is the dream for those of you who are from the Christian faith of the prodigal son. It is a celebration when these guys are coming out of this program. The love and the light and the rejoicing. This is what our society should be about. But instead we have 65% of people coming out of prison end up going right back to prison. Arnold Schwarzenegger can't keep his prisoners enough. He's sending them out to other states to hold or releasing them early. Jersey's got the same problem. It's not a matter of can we solve this problem. It's a matter of do we have the collective will. In Newark, we saw that we were one of the most underparked cities in America. We brought together coalitions, residents and kids to design parks, residents to work on parks, philanthropists from churches in the local community to people on Wall Street pitching in $40 million fund created in a public-private partnerships. Newark is transforming its geography. We saw problems from access to prescription drugs. We went out and found another venture philanthropist, the amazing family, the Hines family, Teresa Hines, come in, partnering them with local providers. And now we have a program that gets more people to preventative care and free access to prescription drugs. It's a model in our state, the only of its kind. Innovations, ideas, imagination, unity. I am more encouraged now as mayor of the city of Newark than I was before I started this job, despite all the people that told me that my optimism, one of my friends said I suffered from a terrible case of BO, bold optimism, and that this would be ground out of me by the realities of governing. And I'm telling you, there are horrible days. We all have them. There are days that your dreams seem so stubborn, but those are the days you grab your dreams by the scruff of their neck and you scream and push like hell. Those are the days that you understand that are the ones that are going to forge your strength and form your fortitude. And despite the fact that some days I come home and I crawl on my couch and I turn on Stephen Colbert and I pray he'll make me laugh. I don't turn on Conan O'Brien anymore. He is a very bad man. But the reality is, I am more excited now than I ever have been. Let me take you back to a seminal moment, and hopefully we can get into the conversation. I always point to certain turning points, and there's a wonderful definition of faith that I have that says faith is when you come to the end of all the light you know when you're about to step into the darkness. And then faith is knowing one of two things will happen when you step, that either you're going to find solid ground underneath you, or the universe is going to send you people to teach you how to fly. And this is the story of my life. I really do believe that I, like so many of my friends, when you know you're doing the right thing, you're in the right zone, that people just appear, things just happen to help you through. And I tell you, I ran for city council, won this great election, and was so excited, and got down to City Hall and met an implacable wall of resistance, and stepped into what became the worst year of my professional career, because I could get nothing done. I was one of 9 council people and was setting records for being outvoted 8-1. And not only that, I had a mayor that immediately saw me as a threat. I think he saw and perceived that one day there would be a street fight like the documentary that was done, and he started making my life miserable the day I got in there. So I was having my car ticketed everywhere I parked, even in front of City Hall when I parked with the other city council people. Believe it or not, my phones were tapped by the city police. The attorney general had to come in and investigate, as the police just said, oh, it was an honest mistake. This is what I was encountering. I had some folks tell me from the administration time and time again, and the mayor echoed it, that you are a legislator, you're not an administrator. Stop telling us how to run this city. You pass laws if you can, and you work on the budget. And that even frustrated me more because we weren't passing our budgets in Newark until the 11th or 12th month in the fiscal year, just passing historical documents to affirm the spending that the mayor did and that the mayor wanted done. So at the end of this year, I was so frustrated. Why did I get into public service? Why did I get into politics? I was doing a great job as a community lawyer. This is crazy. And I remember on one of my worst days, at the year point, I get this call from this incredible woman named Elaine. She was a tenant president of these other high-rises that were in a northern part of the district I represented. And she and I went at it. She's like, it's the Wild Wild West out here. People are afraid. There was an incident. You need to get the police out here. And I pushed back. I said, the police? I can't get them to stop ticketing my car. How am I going to get them to go out there? And we just went back and forth. I raised my voice frustration. She raised her voice. I hung up at her, and I was through. I remember storming out of City Hall, going home to where I was now living in these high-rises, and I'm marching up the steps before the high-rises, getting ready to go into my building, and there is Miss Virginia Jones with her arms crossed, looking at me walking along. And she goes, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't have time. It's been a long day. And she goes, come over here. I go, Miss Jones, I don't have time. Come give Miss Jones a hug. So I go over and I hug Miss Jones. And she goes, now tell me what's going on. And I just let loose on her, a year's worth of frustration, telling her about Elaine Sewell, who she knew, and telling her about what went on and how I didn't know what to do. I was so frustrated. And then she's finally listened to me enough, and she waves her hand and she goes, well, I know what you should do. And she looked like she had this wisdom in her eyes. And all of a sudden I was a little interested, and I said, okay, what? And she goes, yep, I know what you should do. And I'm like, okay, what? Yep, I know what you should do. I go, Miss Jones, I don't have time to play. Tell me what I should do. And she looks at me hard and she goes, almost as if she had the greatest insight that ever came to a human being. She looks at me and she says, you should do something. And I'm like, that's it? Yeah, do something. And I wheeled around in frustration. I stormed to the door of my building, walked into the building, walked to the elevators. Now, I lived on the 16th floor. And those dag-nav elevators were like a mood ring. If I was in a great mood, they'd open up and let me ride on up. If I was in a bad mood or was carrying groceries, the elevators never worked. So I march up the 16 flights of stairs, and then I sit on my couch, more frustrated than I've ever been in my life. Now, I am, as some people might say, a strange individual for lots of reasons you might already be apparent to you. But I love manifestations of faith. I just think that human beings' expressions towards the greatness of the universe and the divine is wonderful. I've studied all different faiths. I've gone to ashrams in India, studied with Buddhist teachers. I'm the only, and I'm still waiting for somebody to challenge me on this, but I'm the only ever black goy head of a Chabad house in the history of the United States. Find another one. I challenge you to find another one. So here I am sitting, and oh, by the way, and on the desk in the mayor's office, I've got the Bhagavad Gita, I've got the Quran, I've got the Tanakh, I've got a couple Bibles, some African prayer beads. A reporter came into my office once, was looking up and down, and goes, Mayor, if the end of the days come, you've got it all covered, man. You're okay. And I said, exactly. So I sit in my chair, and I'm just frustrated. There's a Bible next to me, I rip it open, and there's a passage there that says, if you have strength the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And most people know that one. And then there's one underneath it that says, but sometimes you got to fast and pray. And so I call up my staffer, as the president mentioned, and I said to him, get me a tent. He's like, a what? I said, get me a tent. We need to get a big tent and set it up. And we set up this tent, and I went to the place, to these garden spires, and I said to Miss Sewell, I apologized to her for disrespecting her and raising my voice like I did. And I said, look, I don't know what to do here. I really don't. But I'm going to do something. And I will stay out here with you until we find a solution. And I said, I'm not going to eat any food. I said, I won't eat any solid food. And I said, would you do me a favor? Would you pray with me every morning? And let's get some residents together and just pray on this and pray for some answers, pray for some light. And she said, absolutely. We hugged, we wept, and the whole thing. And then I held a press conference. And I'm a politician, please. So I said to the press, and with all the moral indignancy I could muster, and I said, this is the United States of America. I said, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. I said, how can we have people that live in fear within their own community? I challenge you to pay attention. You only come if somebody gets shot or the pavement's being bled upon. I challenge you to interview the people that live here and hear their story and put a minute of it on the news. And so they interviewed folks and they put it on the news. I went into my tent, slept the night, long night, and woke up the next morning, and guess what was running on the morning news? Because the first thing that happened was these big, huge guys came up to the tent, and they said, are you Cory Booker? And I'm like, yeah. And they said, well, we are correctional officers from a local prison security facility, and we're not going to let you stand out here alone. We're going to stand with you. And so they took up positions around my tent. And next thing you knew, other folks started coming out. First, it was a couple local ministers. One of the guys is my biggest ally today, who is running some of our ex-offender reentry programs. He comes over to me and says, did I hear you're fasting and praying? I'm in. And before you know it, I have local ministers with me. Then, block leaders started coming out. And then we had folks coming out from further out in Newark. Then you had people from outside of Newark. So the mayor of West Orange, which is a suburban town, he came down with his police officers and said, "I will stand with you." Before you knew it, we had businesses coming out and setting up job fairs, and people got hired from the community. Before you knew it, we had guys who were offering to donate computers to a learning center. Before you knew it, we had just action, gospel concerts, health vans coming out to do health screenings. It was an amazing bazaar. NYU students were coming to join us in what we were doing from outside of the state. Some guy in New York, some big business guy, saw what was going on the news as the days progressed, saw all the people and just wanted to do something. So he sent like 500 pizzas out to everybody, which just really ticked me off because I was on a hunger strike. But it was amazing to see this transformation. We even had this 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning meeting with the guys who were allegedly involved in the narcotics trade that were there, and talked to them as if who they were, our brothers and our sisters, a reflection of ourselves. It was amazing. And the 10th day of the hunger strike, the mayor of the city came out. And he brought all his staff and the local police officers. And it was like this big sort of boxing arena with everybody crowded around. And he and I met in the middle. And when I looked upon him, I just felt this sense of peace. That this wasn't my adversary. And I hugged him. And we just embraced each other. These two guys that had been sort of banging heads for a year, we hugged. Somebody took a picture and put it on the front page of a section of the newspaper. And then he just turned around, put away his prepared remarks, and announced, "Hey, this is not going to go on anymore. I'm going to leave police out here until we solve the problem." And where I'm standing, the kids had no place to play. It was 2 acres of just like concrete surrounding 2 high-rises. I'm going to build a playground right here. And everybody applauded. The tent came down, and we celebrated. Now, that's actually not the point of the story. And I'm not going to tell you that all the problems were solved at Garden Spires, because even as mayor, I've had problems out there, and we've had incidents. The mayor kept police out there for a while, but eventually they disappeared, and he never built the park he promised to build. But I'm really happy to tell you I'm mayor of the city now, and I'm building a park there with other partners, and we're getting it done. It's under construction as I speak. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story to me is this moment of my life that after the tent came down, we had a final prayer. Now, I'm the kind of guy, this is what makes me weird, that these are moments that I hold on to and I cling to in difficult times, because what I saw was a whole bunch of folks getting together to pray. There were believers and non-believers. There were blacks and whites and Latinos. There were Christians and Jews and Muslims. There were imams, rabbis, priests and ministers. And the second that this large group of folks all held hands is one of the moments I'll never forget, because as weak as I was from 10 days of just being on liquids, as soon as I touched the hands of all of these other people, I felt strength coursing through my body I had never felt before. I felt that my spirit could have opened up on a mountain and commanded it to move. And then I started to hear the voices of prayer. There were Arabic speakers. There were Spanish speakers. There were Hebrew being spoken. There was English being spoken. People lifted their voices and spoke. And I could swear in the core of my being I heard a spiritual statements being made. They were statements that stretch back to the beginning of time, statements that run through every culture. I heard things like the African saying that says when spider webs are united, they could tie up a lion. I heard the Muslims saying a simple word, tawhid, which is one of the principles of Islam that says we all share one spirit, one soul. I heard the words of a woman, Golda Meir, who said Jews together are strong, but Jews with other people are invincible. I heard the words of a man who was jailed in April of 1963, stuck in a jail cell in a town called Birmingham. And he wrote some letters that he said we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I heard these 3 Latin utterances, the hallmark of a nation, simply say, E pluribus unum. This to me is the quest I think we have. All these people born as individuals who must affirm their own dignity, who must affirm their own light, who must affirm their own love. But ultimately that love will be best defined, that uniqueness that they bring to the table will best be defined by how it engages and connects with other people. This, to me, is what democracy is all about. It's not about what I necessarily read in the Federalist Papers, the Federalist Paper number 10 that talks about factions and groups. To me, democracy is about coming together, recognizing the divinity or the strength or dignity of each other, and finding ways to work together to create a more perfect union. And the work in this democracy has just begun. We are not there yet. The men who were there at the beginning of this democracy, there was a guy who was commanding the Continental Army before Washington took over. His name was Israel Putnam. He was in charge when the British troops stormed a hill called Breed's Hill. And it's actually, most of us know it as Bunker's Hill. And he defended that hill, just inflicting tremendous injury and wounds and devastation on the charging enemy. But eventually they lost. The hill was taken. The British wrote back home and said, we have taken the hill and won the victory, but a few more victories like this and we will lose the continent. And I'll never forget when they gave Daniel Webster gave a monument to the people that died that day at the beginning of our country. He said, and I'll paraphrase, he said in his speech decades later, he said, "We can gather no laurels in a war for independence. Greater hands than ours have gathered them all. But it falls upon our generation to do something for which we will be remembered." So here we are, many years later, a number of generations later, and the question that we must ask as individuals who are part of this collective nation, what are we going to do to be remembered? This is our challenge. Will we yield before those who say it can't be done? That we can't educate all of our children at extraordinarily high levels, that we can't transform schools into cathedrals of learning? Will we yield to say that people cannot affirm their dignity, that the first part of our nation is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that we can't have good health or access to health care for our residents? Are we going to yield to people that say that inner cities are going to be violent? People that are going to say there's going to be poverty in our nation where people will go to bed hungry? Will we yield to all those people who their conventional wisdom says in our lifetime we'll never see the end of that? Or will we do what must be done to answer the call of our country? I end with one of those poems that my mother used to read to me as a boy. My brother and I, as they were trying to, as my brother and I would say, indoctrinate us. The Harriet Tubman lecture, we would always call it. Two of her statues of Harriet Tubman sit on my desk to remind me every day of my parents and what they told us. My mom would read this poem, and this is how I end, and I'd like to talk if we can. It's by Langston Hughes, and it's, "Oh, let America be America again. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, but yet must be. The land where everyone is free, the poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me. Who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must make our mighty dream live again. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be." Thank you. Thank you very much.